Citizens Oversight Committee meeting. Rebecca, are you okay for us to go ahead and start? I got a picture.
Yes, we should be okay to get started.
Okay. And so before I do a roll call, it's important that I do the important COVID-19 notice. In an effort to protect public health and prevent the spread of COVID-19 and to enable appropriate social distancing, the Measure S Citizens Oversight Committee, which is formerly known as Measure Z, is not open for public attendance at this time. All meetings will be held via teleconference. There is a way that you can view the live meeting by going to the website. And also you can email your written comment to publiccomments@sbcity.org by 4:00 p.m. the day of the scheduled meeting. Or you can call 909-384-5208 and leave a recorded comment not to exceed 3 minutes by 4:00 p.m. the day of the scheduled meeting. The subject line of your email should include the meeting date, Measure S Oversight Committee, and whether it is for public comment or for a specific agenda item. So with that being said, I would like to call roll call, and I'll start. Reverend Veronica Martindale Taylor, 6th Ward. And go to Ward 1.
Ms. Williams, present.
Good. Welcome, Ms. Williams.
Welcome, everyone.
Ward 2. We're going to go in that order.
Gloria Maya is absent at this time.
Oh, okay. Just keep going down to Ward 3 as it goes forward.
Ward 3, Gary Walborn is absent at this time.
Okay.
And then Ward 4, we have Commissioner Gallo.
Yes, welcome, Mr. Gallo. Wonderful to have you on board. Excellent.
Good to be here.
Good, thank you.
Ward 5, we have Commissioner Rourke.
Is he here? Yes, good, excellent. Welcome. Again, Happy New Year. Ward 7.
Happy New Year, everyone. Felicia Alexander.
Happy New Year. Hello, Felicia.
And then Mayor's appointee, Commissioner Avila. Is Commissioner Avila with us? Does not appear at this time. Commissioner Avila is with us. And then we have Commissioner Cliff Cummings.
I'm here.
Hello, Mr. Cummings.
Hello.
Excellent.
All right, that concludes.
The roll call. Following the agenda, it says public comments or items listed and not listed on the agenda.
So the city clerk will confirm if we received any public comment.
We did not receive any public comments.
We don't have any public comments at this time?
No, we did not receive any.
Okay, we did not receive any. Okay. So our consent calendar is next.
Yes, we have the approval of the minutes from October the 5th.
Okay. And so I'm going to call for the approval of the minutes for October 5th. Does any?
I'll move them.
Okay.
I believe we move that we approve the minutes from our last meeting, October 5th, 2020.
Good. And it's been seconded by whom?
Cliff Cummings.
Cliff
Mr.
Cummings.
Okay, Mr. Cummings. Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None, okay, good. Ayes, carry the vote.
I want to abstain, Mike Gallo. I was
Yes,
not in
because he
attendance.
wasn't. Thank you, Mike. Mike is, and before I go on, Mike is our new member to our Measure S. So again, Mike, I would like to just take this time for you to introduce yourself to the group. Some of the people already know you should, but at least for those that don't, please introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm still the same person for those who know me and those who don't. But
Volume 19, 20.
Again, I'm Mike Gallo.
Volume
I'm president
22.
and CEO of a company called Kelly Space and Technology here at the former Norton Air Force Base. I came to California as a United States Air Force officer at Norton Air Force Base. Went to work for TRW Ballistic Missiles Division, then founded Kelly Space 27 years ago, and stayed right here at Norton Air Force Base. I've been engaged in a lot of community-based activities on the school board. I'm a governor appointee to the Workforce Investment Board and on our county's workforce board. Been on a number of boards and chairmanships throughout the state and on some national aerospace committees, et cetera. And just happy to be here to see how we can move San Bernardino forward.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mike. Yes, definitely. Excellent school board member. That's where I've known you to do such great service. Does any of our members would like to say anything to our new member, Mike Gallo?
Yeah, be careful.
Yeah. With the congratulations in mind.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Felicia.
Welcome aboard, Mike.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good. Well, that being said, again, Mike, you're welcome. Welcome again to our Measure S Oversight Committee. And we'll just continue to go on our agenda and go straight to our staff reports.
So Chairman Martindale, on an annual basis, the committee will nominate chair and vice chair. So before we move into the final staff report, if we want to do that, or if we want to go ahead and move, we do have Terry Shea here, and he will be available to answer any questions when we get into the audit. But I think it'd be good to go ahead and do your nominations for both chair and vice chairs.
Yes, and to the members that we did do a nomination in July, yes, but just for the articles, we have to do another election process. So the chair's position has to be re-nominated as well as the vice chair. And so at this time, I'm calling for nominations of the chair again. Or we can remain it the same and carry on. And that could be moved.
I move that we remain the same and carry on.
Okay. Okay,
Second.
it's been moved that we remain the same and carry on. Is there a second for that?
Second.
And it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of that, say aye.
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 Okay. Any opposed? Any opposed? Okay, well, let's carry on and move on. Thank you very much. We will carry on and remain as is.
Is that, just to clarify, that was a nomination to carry on for both chair and vice chair?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, with that being said, now, Rebecca, I would like to go ahead on with the staff reports.
All right, beautiful. Well, I'd like to introduce to you a couple people from our finance team. We have Sam Singri that's going to be leading tonight's discussion and making the initial presentation on the audited financial statements that will be presented, and then talking about next steps for the Measure S committee. Also like to take this opportunity to introduce to you Barbara Whitehorn. She is the city's new Director of Finance, and today is her very first day, so you're getting to meet her before anyone else. So welcome, Barbara. We're very excited to have you with us. We've got Shelby Bergwan. She is part of our finance team as well, and is working as part of the budget team. And we'll be working, I think, very closely with this committee moving forward. And then, of course, we have our city manager, Rob Field, with us. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Sam to present this evening's staff report. And then, of course, there'll be time for questions after he concludes his presentation. So, Sam, it's all you.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm going to, let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, is everyone able to see the presentation now? All right, great.
Yes, yes, we are, Sam.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody. It's nice to see everybody again. So as Rebecca mentioned tonight, we'll be discussing the Measure Z financial results and audit results for fiscal year 2019-2020, and then also looking at the Measure S budget process and some of the next steps going forward there. So looking first at Measure Z, I know most of the committee here is obviously familiar with Measure Z, but maybe some brief background just for any public that might be viewing. Measure Z was the 0.25% transaction tax that was approved by voters back in November of 2006. The sales tax collections then began in April 2007. As part of the approved sales tax measure, the voters established this Citizen Oversight Committee that was created to review the annual expenses and use of those funds, as well as to then report on the use of those proceeds to the mayor, the city council, and to public. And in conjunction with Measure Z, the public or the citizens also passed the advisory measure YY, which stipulated that Measure Z proceeds should be used to fund more police officers and support personnel, as well as various anti-gang or anti-crime operations. Along with the Measure Z and Measure YY, the City Council and the Mayor also adopted an expenditure policy in March of 2007, reiterating again that those funds should be spent in accordance with the ballot language of Measure Z and Measure YY on the law enforcement and anti-gang, anti-crime operations, as well as stating that the intent of Measure Z funds was to enhance or to supplement, but not replace or to supplant current general fund spending on law enforcement and crime prevention programs. So with that, we'll look at the revenues and expenditures for Measure Z for fiscal year 2019-2020. So this is going to cover the period from July 1st, 2019 through June 30, 2020. You can see the total revenues for the year was just under 9.2 million. It's about a $500,000 decrease from the total Measure Z revenues for fiscal year 2019. As you can expect, given the sort of the volatility in the last quarter of fiscal year 20, which was sort of your March through June timeframe with just sort of the initial stay-at-home orders, some of the business closures, some of the other policies that were enacted in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a increase in unemployment, not only within the city and state, but nationwide, worldwide, really, as well as just lower consumer spending. So that did lower the taxable sales and the tax receipts for Measure Z for when compared to fiscal year 2019. Looking at expenditures, which generally track pretty close with Measure Z revenues, those also came in just under 9.2 million for a total change in your program balance or revenues in excess of expenditures of about $12,000. All in all, the program balance, or you think of it sort of the inception to date revenues versus expenditures, was a negative $2,000 in Measure Z, which indicates that the city has spent its full Measure Z allocations to date, and that additional $2,000 of resources was covered by other general fund revenue sources. So looking a little more detailed at the expenditures for Measure Z, which consistent to what we, the committee might remember from the last few years that were presented last summer, relate to positions whose job duties and classifications are substantially dedicated to activities that are related to those, to the ballot language and to the Measure YY activities of law enforcement and anti-crime, anti-gang operations. So the majority of these positions are sworn officer positions, as well as a number of civilian personnel, as well as the Violence Intervention Program Manager. So all in all, for fiscal year 2020, there were 62 positions that were able to be funded by Measure Z. Due to the decrease in revenues year over year, this is less than the 70 that was funded for fiscal year 2019, but it is still higher than the level that it was at for fiscal year 2018 and prior. That was only 55 positions. So as the revenues and collections have increased, so have the number of positions being able to be funded by Measure Z revenues. This chart sort of goes back to what I was speaking to earlier with the total program balance from inception to date. So you can see revenues and expenditures mostly tracking pretty closely together throughout the life of Measure Z. And then by the time we get all the way to the far right there at fiscal year 20, there's essentially equal, just have that $2,000 balance of cumulative expenditures that are more than revenues that is covered by other general fund resources. So next, looking at the supplement versus supplant analysis, there is a larger, more detailed version within the staff report that would be happy to discuss if there are any questions, but wanted to kind of summarize it with two different charts here and looking whether Measure Z has continued to supplement general fund law enforcement expenditures, or if it has replaced or supplanted those general fund expenditures. And what you can see here from this chart is just looking at the total police expenditures as a percentage of the overall general fund budget. So looking at the sort of the left side of the chart there, when Measure Z was first enacted in fiscal year 2007, 2008, sort of that baseline level of about 57% of the general fund was spent on police expenditures. And there's a lot that's going on in those 13 years since then. With the you've got the Great Recession, you have the housing bubble bursting, we've got the city, declaring bankruptcy, the city then emerging from bankruptcy, all in those years since then. But what you can see from the chart is that really the percentage of police expenditures as a total of the general fund budget has remained at that 53% baseline, or a lot of years has exceeded that. So indicating that the city is continuing its commitment to fund these types of law enforcement and violence intervention programs through the general fund, that Measure Z is supplementing in that goal. Perhaps another way of looking, again, same analysis, but just looking at it from another angle, looking at the police expenditures, the percentage of police expenditures funded just by Measure Z revenues alone. So if Measure Z were truly replacing or supplanting the general fund spending on law enforcement, which is not as intended, but if that were the case, you would expect to see a sharp increase in this line, essentially that more and more police expenditures are being funded by Measure Z alone and replacing the general fund funding of those expenditures. But really, as you can tell from the chart here, since the first full fiscal year of implementation, which was 2008, all the way through 2020, it's remained fairly consistent in sort of that tight band of anywhere between 8 to 14%. The average is about 11.5%, and that's right where fiscal year 2020 checks in, is about 12% of total police expenditures that are funded by Measure Z revenues. So next, wrapping up and looking at
All right, can you hold just for a second on that? Just going into that where you just covered. So is all of the Measure S funding is going to completely, our police department are saying that they need all of those funds in order to make these appointments that is noted right here in this audit?
Are you talking about
as far as your salaries, detective, officer? Is Measure S going to have to be the ones to carry the employment process of this continuous, or? Or the reason why I'm asking is because I know that we're talking about beautification as well as the city of San Bernardino. So I need you know to hear how you're looking at that.
Chairman Martindale, I might be able to speak to that a little bit, and then
Okay.
Sam can fill in. So
Okay.
what Sam is talking about right now is a look back on Measure Z expenditures under the quarter cent. This does not apply to Measure S, which was not passed at this point in time. Measure S was passed this fiscal year, and it will be going from a 0.25%, which was what we had under Measure Z, to a 1%. So there will be an increase in terms of revenue generated by Measure S, and those will be the things that as we conclude the discussion on the review of the audited financial statement in terms of what we have done with the expenditures under Measure Z. We will be talking about what next steps are for the planning and preparation of next fiscal year's budget and the use of Measure Z revenue, which is that increase in revenue going from the 0.25% to the 1%, which, as you may recall, we won't start collecting those funds until April of 2021, and we won't actually receive those funds as our first allocation until June of this year. So we will be talking about the budget planning process, how you as a committee will have an opportunity to provide input into that process as we conclude the discussion on the audited financial statement for last fiscal year 1920.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was just wondering if there was any room, but evidently all funding have went to the employment of the police department. There is no funds available, what you're saying at this point, that is allocated for any beautification or any projects for the city.
Not under, so Measure Z had very clear parameters on what those funds should be used for. And so what we are showing in the audited financial statement is that we use them for their intended purpose. So this is a look back, not a planning moving forward. We will be talking about the planning moving forward and the resources that will be available to provide recommendation. The policy that was adopted in terms of the expenditure of the Measure S funds called for ensuring that we're preserving our current service levels and then allowing for increased services in a variety of areas. And those were clearly outlined in the ballot language and then the policy that was recommended by you as a committee and then adopted by the council, which we'll talk about shortly. So there will be increased revenue. We will be talking about how those funds will be used, but in terms of the look back for fiscal year 1920, those resources were allocated through the budget process and expended through the budget process, and Sam's walking us through just a demonstration that we spent the money in the way that we had made a commitment to do so.
Excellent, thank you.
May I ask a question at this point?
Yeah.
I'm just looking at our slide here, and I'm just, I know it's kind of a gray area, but how are we determining the supplement versus supplant? And I realize that some of this is in the past, so I don't want to go beat a dead horse. But whenever I look at the beginning of the measure, we're seeing 10, 8, 9% of total police expenditures, which from 13-14 to 16-17 moved up to 14%, which, you know, I don't have my handy dandy calculator here, but that's somewhere between 50 and 100% increase. You know, as far as a percent. So that seems like it's making a sizable movement. And I'm just wondering, I think more the context of the question is for the future of how we look and how we justify that. How have we done it in the past during this time, and how, you know, what have we learned from the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is, I guess, like Rebecca mentioned, looking back, how we've sort of analyzed it is trying to just see a trend. And I know, percentage-wise, year over year, like you mentioned, from 12 to 14%, but looking more as, if it was a more dramatic, if it was 12 and then, maybe 25 or 30%, that it really is jumping up and showing a complete sort of replacement of the general fund as opposed to supplementing the general fund. I will say for Measure S, so going forward, to answer that question, there is no, this language isn't in the Measure S expenditure policy just because it can cover a broader range of services and programs, and aside from just law enforcement. So going forward, there really isn't the requirement to sort of track this element of it.
And Commissioner Work, to add to that, part of the process moving forward, so under Measure Z, the committee's role was simply to review that audited financial statement to confirm that the money was expended in the way that we had a commitment to under Measure YY. Moving forward, as a committee, you will be making recommendations involved in the budget process. So what we would expect to be seeing is you would be seeing what the proposed budget is, and then when we come back with the audited financial statements is a comparison and confirmation that we expended the money in the way that we committed to with the adopted budget. So that's what you'll be looking at. The funds can be expended in a variety of ways, and we'll talk about that a little longer. Sam may want to speak to the dip that you see between fiscal years 16-17 and 17-18. That was more of an accounting issue in terms of when we received revenue. So between those years, there really wasn't that drastic of a decrease between those years, but I don't know, Sam, if you want to touch on that a little bit, just to make sure everybody understands what they're looking at.
Yeah, and that's consistent. I don't know if everyone has a really good memory from last summer when we presented these years, but in fiscal year 2018, the state of California was transitioning from the Board of Equalization, who used to be the government body that oversees the collection and distribution of sales tax, to a new Department of Tax and Fee Administration. So as part of that transition, during the year-end piece, there was a distribution that was missed, and it was not specific to Measure Z, it wasn't specific to the city, it was statewide. So every city and jurisdiction across the state saw this dip in fiscal year 2008 or 2017-18. And then there was essentially an extra period of collections that then to subsequently get everything caught up in fiscal year 18-19. So a little bit of a false, or larger than normal decrease, and then catch up for the subsequent year.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we look at the audit results?
Well, I have a few questions. I'll let you finish, I think, the report.
Okay, that'll be great. Yeah, we can pause after the Measure Z portion before we get into Measure S.
Right.
So, as required in the ballot language and reiterated in the expenditure policy, the city is required to undergo an annual review of the Measure Z expenditures and revenues to ensure that those funds are spent in accordance with the ballot measure as well as the advisory measure YY. So to accomplish this for fiscal year 2020, the city engaged with Rogers, Anderson, Malady & Scott. So they're a local firm out of San Bernardino, just down the road here, to perform this work in conjunction with their audit of all of the city's funds as well. They do the citywide audit. And essentially their audit procedures encompass three areas. First, they're going to look at revenues and receipts of funds. So I mentioned the CDTFA earlier, but the auditors will actually be able to get a statement from the CDTFA detailing out all of the sales tax distributions to the city for Measure Z specifically during this period. And so they'll compare the statement that they received from the CDTFA to the city's internal records to ensure that things are being receipted in the proper period, at the proper amounts, and following our own prescribed policies and procedures. Next, they'll also look at the expenditures or disbursements, which we already looked at are wholly related to payroll costs. So for this item, they'll be examining the classifications and job duties of the specific positions allocated to Measure Z, and ensuring that they are consistent with the ballot language of Measure Z and the advisory measure YY, that those activities that they're engaged in are consistent with those law enforcement and violence intervention activities. They'll also look at things that, making sure the pay rates are properly approved, time cards, things like that for a sampling of employees as well. And then as sort of an overarching procedure we provide them with the sales tax ordinances and any related resolutions or the expenditure policy for them to familiarize themselves with, so that as they're looking at the revenues and expenditures and the city's accounting of Measure Z funds, that they're ensuring that what the city's doing is in accordance with those internal policies and procedures that the city has adopted. So as you can tell from the report on pages 2 and 3, I think it's pages 2 and 3 of the report within your agenda packet, there were no findings or exceptions that were identified for fiscal year 2020, which indicates that the auditors were able to conclude that the funds were spent in accordance with the eligible costs as stipulated by Measure Z and Measure YY. So before we move on to Measure Z, before we move on to Measure S, are there any questions to go over sort of the look back at Measure Z for fiscal year 20?
Yeah, I have a few questions. I know I'm new to the group and everything, but were there any pre-established performance metrics for these expenditures? And, specifically, I wonder if what efforts did these positions fund, and, what were the outcomes? Were there pre-established goals and objectives specified for these expenditures, and did we meet them? Did it actually result in reduction in crime or whatever the metric that we're using to evaluate this? I have no doubt that we expended the dollars in accordance with the expenditure protocols, but did we actually yield some benefit from those expenditures would be my question. It's a broad-based question, I know. But do we take a look at any performance metrics and have those pre-established before we make expenditures?
Yes, I know. I can maybe start this off, and Rebecca, if you want to add if there's any details. So I know, the police department does, track arrests and certain other metrics related to crimes and certain other activities. So I know that's department-wide that is tracked. In addition to the Violence Intervention Program, they also track a number of metrics, and this does fund the Violence Intervention Program manager. So I know they are tracked. I don't know on the PD side, or Rebecca, if you know if there's anything specific to the Measure Z positions as opposed to just the overall metrics.
No, there were not separate goals established. It was departmental goals that were established during this period. That is something that could be included as part of the committee's recommendation moving forward with the expenditure of the Measure S funds. But specific to Measure Z, no, those were not established as standalone goals for those expenditures specifically. But very good question.
Yeah, very good, very good. We'll look at that for Measure S.
Yeah, I definitely make a recommendation that we do that. Otherwise, you just don't know if your expenditures are being, targeted for the right things, that are yielding the, appropriate returns on the investment that we're all making. And I think that's just kind of a basic accountability measure.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're all the questions I think are sort of touching on sort of areas of improvement that could be made that I think are being addressed with the changes with Measure S. So I think it's good everyone's on the same page.
Right.
Yeah, Mike, Cliff, you have to understand what was the length of time we went without a meeting being called? Mm-hmm. A year and a half, 2?
No, longer than that. During the bankruptcy, there was no funding for us to be able to revise or anything because nothing had been documented.
Yeah, but there were funds being expended. So yeah.
Right, and we did not have a meeting to go through that.
Yeah.
More than 3 to 4
probably.
years.
Wow.
And so while that expenditure was going on, Mike, just for background history, we were waiting for a call to have a meeting.
Got it. Well, let's probably not continue.
That's fixed now.
Don't recommend we continue that practice.
Yeah, that's fixed now. We're okay.
That's great. Thanks, Cliff.
All right. If there's no other ones, we'll move on to Measure S. So Measure S, as we've sort of referenced to already, The updated or the renewed sales tax measure approved by voters in this past November general election increased the Measure Z 0.25% sales tax add-on rate to a full 1%. And as Rebecca had mentioned earlier, those collections do start in April of 2021. So there will be a transition period of about 3 months within this current fiscal year. We'll be collecting the full 1% of Measure S revenues. And so we'll go over how that's proposed to be handled in the upcoming slides. But in addition to increasing the sales tax rate to 1%, the ballot language of Measure S also allowed for essentially the transition of the Citizens Oversight Committee from Measure Z to the Measure S Citizens Oversight Committee that's meeting tonight. And as part of the updated policies and expenditure policy adopted by Council in October of 2020, the Measure S Citizens Oversight Committee has an expanded role in providing review and input of the spending plan of Measure S revenues. So it's an expanded and much more involved role than the Measure Z committee, which as we've already discussed. So for the Measure S spending plan, essentially the policy stipulates that the city manager and city staff will present the proposed Measure S spending plan to the Citizens Oversight Committee for their review and input. Before then, that is forwarded on to the Mayor and City Council for them to consider and to adopt as part of the larger citywide budget for that year. So in keeping with that spending plan, some of the guidelines that are outlined within the expenditure policy is that the Measure S spending plan will preserve and restore existing basic service levels. The spending plan should be in line with the general fund reserve policy. So back in November of 2018, the Mayor and City Council adopted a general fund reserve policy stipulating that the city should hold a total reserve of 25% of general fund budgeted expenditures. So that's split between a 15% emergency reserve and a 10% economic contingencies reserve, essentially just ensuring that there are enough funds set aside for any infrequent or unusual occurrences such as natural disasters, pandemics, recessions, and other economic downturns to ensure that the city has enough liquidity to make it through those events. So that's important to remember as the spending plans brought forward and as any new revenue dollars are appropriated and programmed within the budget, that for every new dollar, it is required for the city to set aside a quarter of those in order to maintain in compliance with its general fund reserve policy and ultimately just to maintain a sound financial practices there.
So to clarify on that, are we assuming that any expenditure that we make is basically will have authority to expend or some kind of indicator on 75% of those funds? And
We're advisors.
Yeah, well, advisors, okay. And then basically 25% will be held back to meet some of this reserve in each one of these budget accounts, or especially in this one, Measure S, are we going to hold back basically 25%? Is that what I'm hearing?
I don't know. Rebecca, do you want to answer that?
So we will just ensure that when we are presenting the budget as a whole, we have to make sure that for every dollar of revenue or dollar of expense that we have, that we are setting aside 25% to be held in reserve. Remember that Measure S is not our only source of revenue, so council, when they adopt a budget, needs to take that into account. So if we're expending additional dollars in Measure S revenue, then we're going to have to set aside some of those additional dollars. So that will be some of the discussion that we're going to be coming forward. We're going to be holding a budget workshop with the council and with you as a committee. We have a long list of identified needs based on the various assessments that have been done, et cetera. We'll be presenting that information to you. We'll be coming back then with a preliminary budget that's incorporating some of that feedback, and then presenting that budget to the mayor and council for final adoption in May. So this will be a process that we're going to be going through. Yes, our reserve policy does require that we set aside the 25%, but that could be a combination of Measure S revenue and other sources of revenue. But overall, that is what needs to be set aside. So if we're increasing expenditures, then we need to increase what we set aside for that reserve.
Yeah. Rebecca, can you send Mike Gallo what we have recommended to the council?
Yes.
Does he have a
Yes.
copy?
We have a copy of the adopted policy, and I will make sure that we send the staff report that was presented to council when they considered that item. So that may be helpful.
Yes. That will.
In addition,
take a look at that.
Rebecca, you might list 1 or 2 or 3 other sources of income as an example beyond, so that
Yes.
Mike's caught up to speed and others.
We will, and you know what, I will also send our budget report so that it talks about all the different sources of revenue so that you've got that summary as well.
Yeah, I'm familiar with some of them,
Okay.
Property tax, sales tax, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah,
Okay, we'll make sure that we get that over to you.
great.
So in addition to that general fund reserve policy and preserving existing service levels, the spending plan that will be presented to the committee is to be in accordance with the Measure S ballot language, as well as those recommendations that Rebecca had just referenced, and that are also included in the established Measure Z expenditure policy. But those are items, public safety, violence intervention, cleaner and safer neighborhoods, retaining and attracting new businesses, maintenance and improvements at city parks, libraries, and streets, as well as programs for youth, seniors, and the homeless. So for the current fiscal year, I mentioned how we have that transition period of 3 months with collection starting on April 1st. The city staff is still in the process of performing our mid-year budget review. So there'll be additional information that will come out as we get updated estimates and get a little more clarification on the current year revenues. But as it stands right now, the additional revenues from the passage of Measure S, so the incremental 0.75% of collections, are estimated for those last 3 months to be about 6.75 million. And so the spending plan to be proposed will essentially include this beginning balance, if you will, of 6.75 million from the last quarter due to the incremental piece of Measure S for fiscal year 21, in addition to the full year projection for the upcoming fiscal year 21-22. So there'll be sort of this, again, you have this additional funds from the 3 months of the current year, plus the full year projection for the next year, looking out to program all those dollars in fiscal year 22.
Sam, Cliff, what methodology is being used to come up with the prediction of the revenue estimates? This isn't a great example is pension funds with wild-eyed projections on what revenues would be, which were never going to happen. So where we stand on this?
Right. So we do look at, sort of trends where things are historically trending, where they're currently trending. And we also have an outside consultant that services most of the state of California. So they're widely used, widely respected in the industry. And we utilize them to be able to crunch some of the data and the numbers and then provide us with a projection moving forward for each fiscal year. So we've used them for a number of years for our sales tax estimates, both sales tax and Measure Z previously.
What's their batting average?
I might let Shelby do that. If you have anything, but I mean, from my understanding of what I've seen, they've been pretty fairly spot on. Most years they've been even under by maybe a few 100,000 or so out of maybe 30-40 million. So I mean, pretty spot on.
Pretty strong. And the 6.75 million that is there on the top line, that's already been accounted for since the last quarter, or have they not gotten that to you yet?
That is just the estimated amount from the collections of the see if I can back this up. So that is just the
You back up to the last quarter because you had revenue coming in, right?
right, but that is still at the current Measure Z rate. So
Right. Agreed. And that's been tallied and is accurate?
Yes, yeah. So, but you're talking about like their historical, like looking at what they've projected for Measure Z this year and what they're up to. Yes, yeah. So yeah, they've been very accurate.
Great, thanks.
So yes, this number, I will say, this number could change again as we're getting updated estimates from them and looking at current year or current month data. Up to then, once we complete our mid-year budget review, that'll be more clear. But that, at least as of right now, that's looking at as the additional revenues from this current year.
Sam, I may add to that. We did have some lowered projections early on as the pandemic hit with some level of uncertainty. So when the budget was adopted this year, our projections on revenue for all sales tax, not just Measure Z, was lowered. After receiving our first quarter numbers, and we will have updated numbers for mid-year coming on February the 17th. Those are tracking a little bit higher than we had initially anticipated. So there has been some fluctuation there, largely due to the uncertainty that we've experienced this year. But by and large, they've provided fairly accurate numbers.
Okay, some final additional considerations in regards to the spending plan that will be coming forward in the coming weeks and months. On that first bullet point of preserving and restoring basic service levels, it is important to keep in mind that over the last 2 fiscal years alone, the city has had to eliminate over 100 positions as budget balancing efforts to eliminate structural deficits. So there were 78 positions eliminated in fiscal year 20. An additional 27 eliminated in this current fiscal year. So as those service levels are restored to their sort of basic levels, and any of these new programs that are desired are to be taken off, there is some element of a staffing component to that. So important to keep that in mind. In addition to the sizable backlog of infrastructure and capital needs throughout the city. Many of the city's roads having been rated by an independent pavement management engineer, rated as poor or very poor.
Third world.
So there's a lot of road and infrastructure maintenance that need to take place, estimated about $210 million, an additional nearly $200 million in deferred maintenance of city facilities, as well as a number of outdated software and hardware systems, primarily the city's permitting system, which going back to that bullet point on attracting and retaining businesses. The permitting system is an essential part of the building and development within the city. So some of those systems, like the payroll system, permitting system, are so outdated that they're no longer supported by vendors. So they're in need of replacement, as well as various vehicles and heavy equipment that's used in the replacement and repair of street lights, traffic signals, and other park or public works improvements as well are past their useful life and in need of replacements. So looking forward at the next steps.
Just a question: has there been any thought on prioritization of these types of expenditures, and which ones are more critical that might actually be able to yield, as you mentioned, one example, perhaps additional revenue, streamline services that might bring additional investment in developments, et cetera, to the city, because we're kind of getting into the 20th century, not necessarily the 21st century. I'm just wondering if that kind of thought process is going to be interjected into the expenditure plan, as versus just we probably have way more deficits than we do revenue coming in. So how is that prioritization going to occur?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, the list of needs is, I think, much longer than the any 1 year individually. But that is part of this spending plan, and part of the plan moving forward is that we will be using sort of these critical areas as well as the priorities that are laid out within Measure S to identify what are the more critical or maybe more strategic.
Yeah. It'd be just good to establish some evaluation criterion up ahead of time, before everybody just starts throwing against the dartboard. you know?
A very good question, Commissioner Gallo. I think it's going to be a combination of things. We've recently concluded a street assessment, so that will be coming in. So the streets that are identified for repair, the Public Works Department will be presenting that information. So you're going to get that information in different ways depending on the particular area of focus. But it is a very good point, and I think that's something that we've got to account for as we present the options, our list of needs, the priority levels, and why they are being recommended, and then receive community input as well. So,
Yeah, Rebecca, let me add on, it's Cliff. I think having a new city manager who's diving into this both feet is great, because I've already had a few meetings with him, and looking at the various needs, you know, his expertise coming from Riverside and having been in San Bernardino family-wise for a long time, I think him coming in puts a set of eyes on it that is going to be incredibly beneficial for us, because he will no doubt have some weight with the city council and where that's going to go. But again, you know, we may look at one thing and with one vision, and the reality of city life and government may hit us between the eyes. So our job is to come up with that, but we're finally, now that we're having meetings, but we're going to have some pretty valuable input, and he's assessing that. As I understand it, the entire staff is assessing that now. So we'll get, we've got some rough ideas, but it'll get much more finite as we go.
Okay, so looking at the next steps and plan going forward, we mentioned the mid-year budget update for the current year, which will be going to the City Council in just over 2 weeks on the 17th. Subsequent to that meeting, we will also then kick off the spending plan, as well as a number of budget workshops with the mayor and City Council in the mid-April timeframe. I believe that's actually the next item on the agenda after this report, is to nail down a meeting date to start off that process for the Measure S spending plan for next year. And I'm sure there'll be, you know, a number of meetings for the, you know, April to May timeframe. But currently, then the target date for budget adoption by the mayor and city council is June 2nd. So we'll, you know, begin those discussions in mid-April, but obviously as many meetings as the committee deems necessary to sort of work through the spending plan and ultimately forward that on with a recommendation to council. We'll be working through April and May to accomplish that.
So before you move on, Sam, thank you. So your mid-year update to City Council is what you're giving us right now?
The mid-year update is citywide, so it's going to include, you know, not just Measure S or Measure Z.
But pretty much the documentation that you're giving us, that's what you're providing for council. That's for the mid-year update, right?
Yes, it's for the mid-year of the current year, and then along with that, we should be able to have some more refined estimates on that Measure S portion for the fiscal year 21. So we went back to that 6.75. It's looking like that might come in a little higher, but as we get closer to that date and when we ultimately present to council, that'll be more solidified, and then that's what then will be brought to the next meeting for the committee here.
So when you meet with mid-April, the reason why I'm asking, because we as this committee needs to get these dates right. So when you meet mid-April for Measure S for the review, we have to meet prior to in order to give our recommendations to that meeting.
No, not prior to the April meeting. The April meeting will be simply a budget workshop to provide the mayor and council with information in terms of what we anticipate will be our revenues coming into next fiscal year. Some of the areas, like I mentioned, we've recently completed our street assessment. So providing some details in terms of some of the identified priority areas where funding is going to be needed to receive that input. We'll be presenting that same information to you as a committee, and then coming back with something more definitive in terms of a spending plan or recommendation for you to review and provide input. So That first workshop is a little bit more broad. It is more that educational piece to kind of walk through the particulars of what we're anticipating for next fiscal year and all of the needs that have been identified, so that you have a clearer picture of that as we head into trying to put together a proposed budget. That would be
just 1 second, and then I'll come. I think that's Felicia that just came in. But my question is, so can this committee go to that workshop, or is this going to be disclosed for council members?
Oh, no, the committee, well, in the Zoom meeting, you wouldn't be in the Zoom meeting with the council, but certainly can participate as just like the public is with public comment, and to watch the meeting so that you can receive that information. And then we will be doing a follow-up meeting specifically with this committee, sharing that same information. So yes, you're welcome to participate in the council meeting. We encourage you to do that. And then we will also be coming back and addressing the committee specifically with that same information, so that we can be making sure that we're incorporating your thoughts and input in this process from the very beginning.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, someone from our advisory had something to say. Was it Felicia or who?
Hi, it's Felicia.
Okay.
I just had questions. I want to go back to Commissioner Gallo's question regarding prioritization. So when I look at the next steps, where in these next steps will the prioritization component be reviewed? Is it before the February 17th meeting? And who makes those recommendations in terms of prioritization?
So the February 17th meeting is for just the mid-year update for this current fiscal year 2021. It's not talking about the expenditure of the new revenue generated from Measure S. Like I say, that's the intent of that measure or the fiscal year 21-22 budget workshops, is to start getting moving towards that prioritization. So presenting the information we have in terms of the assessments, our identified needs, getting input from the mayor and council, as well as you as a committee, as we work towards putting together a preliminary budget that can be presented and reviewed by you as a committee, and then get your input before that gets presented to the mayor and council. So we're not presenting a final preliminary budget to the mayor and council until we've gotten your input, because that needs to be incorporated with the recommendation. So that's part of the process. It is a fairly tight timeline. We have to have an adopted budget in place by the beginning of next fiscal year. So we're trying to work into that. There's a lot of work that has to go into putting together this information, identifying where those priority needs are, and we have needs just about in every single area of the city. So that's what staff's working on right now, and the finance department's working with the department directors to pull that information that can be presented and discussed with you as a committee and the council.
So thank you for the explanation, but where I'm making a stickler, you have mid-April on here twice, and then I heard the date April 1st. So I just need clarity in my mind, to be honest with you, exactly what we're going to do and what is a spending plan versus a budget workshop.
So at the budget workshop, we will not have a detailed spending plan. We'll be identifying what those needs are and discussing with you, one, our anticipated sources of revenue, all of the needs that have been identified, the prioritization based on the assessments that have been done. That's where that discussion is going to be discussed. We aren't presenting a preliminary budget at that point in time. April 8th is when that's going to be presented to the mayor and council, and right thereafter, we will be meeting with the Measure S committee, and that's what we need to discuss today. We need to calendar those meetings so that we've got them set and we're prepared to present that information to you right about the same time that budget workshop's held with the mayor and council. And then we'll be doing a follow-up. We've got to prepare that preliminary budget after those budget workshops that gets presented to you to get your input and then present to the mayor and council the recommended budget for next fiscal year in May. Or for adoption by early June. So there are going to be multiple, during that month and a half's period of time, we are going to need to have quite a few meetings with both the committee and then, of course, like I say, we've got the council workshops. So there's a lot of work.
Just to jump in, Rebecca, too, if we could have some dates, because we have to get the community involved in that too through the workshop. So when are they invited?
So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. The budget team has some recommended dates in terms of target dates that we want to get on calendar. That first budget workshop with you, that would be somewhere right after the council's budget workshop on April 8th. We want to get that on calendar, and then some tentative dates moving forward. So that's part of the agenda discussion today. We wanted just to set up kind of what we're talking about, how tight the timeline is so that you can see what we're talking in terms of needing to move forward pretty quickly with putting this together. And, you know, this is an annual process, so this is for fiscal year 21-22, but this is something that will be an ongoing process, and we'll be providing regular reports back to you in terms of those expenditures moving forward. So,
will there be a specific way to identify where Measure S funds have been spent as part of this budget, or is it just going to be, you know, kind of allocated generally? And again, I'm kind of coming back to my original question: is what we're doing actually making a difference in whatever area that we're doing the investments in?
That's a really good question, Commissioner Gallo. Yes, you will have a comprehensive budget, which accounts for all the city's revenue and expenditures, but we will also have a breakout that will specifically outline the use of the Measure S revenues and the expenses that are tied to those revenues. So that will be presented to you separately, but we also want you to see that in the context of the overall budget.
Yeah, it'd be great to be able to tie that to some kind of performance metric, so it's just not a validation that we made the expenditure, which is really easy to do, make expenditures, but to actually accomplish something worth accomplishing is, in my mind, our best work.
Absolutely. Point well taken. All right. So are we ready to talk about trying to schedule the dates, or were there other comments or things that you'd like to talk about before we talk about scheduling?
But definitely the dates are very important, because basically I know the committee might want to, well, before I even say what that is, but yes, let's look at the dates and the calendars of these workshops.
I think, sorry to interrupt, just to go back, but I think part of the staff report from the last one is just to accept the staff recommendation, just so it's, you know, accepting the audit report, and then that also then gets forwarded to the mayor and city council. So if the committee could consider that item just so we can move that one forward before we.
So moved.
Second.
Yes. So the acceptance of that presentation of the expenditures has been moved and seconded. Is all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, good. Sam, it's been moved and approved.
Thank you.
Okay, Rebecca, hit us with those dates for these workshops.
All right, budget team, you want to talk about the dates that we're looking at for I believe it was the week after the April 8th council workshop. We were looking, I believe, at the week of the 12th. Shelby, can you confirm? And Sam?
I had recommended either April 15th or the week of April 19th.
So for the committee, we just need confirmation if Thursday, April the 15th would work. We do have, I believe, a Parks and Recreation Commission meeting that is scheduled to conclude about 5:30 p.m. We can't have two meetings that are happening simultaneously, so that would be an option to start at 5:30.
We usually, I think our meetings, everybody agreed basically on Mondays.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the
Mondays
Thursdays are
good
really
for
tough.
everybody? Still, yeah? So let's look at our Mondays. Let's look at the Monday. Maybe that 12th?
That works.
Works for me.
Monday, that 12th? Okay.
Shelby,
Okay.
could you have everything prepared for the committee by the 12th?
And
If
if
the
not, the
in-
19th's fine too.
If the information is the same as what's being presented to the council on April 8th, yes. But if we want to provide an update regarding the April 8th council meeting, no.
So
Can
to
you
the
push it to the 19th?
We could do the 19th. We have an Arts and Historical Preservation Commission meeting that evening, and so we may need to start a little bit later at 6 p.m.
Later the better for me.
I'm
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
So if we'd start the meeting at 6 p.m. on April 19th, that should work.
Okay.
Okay.
Members? How's that? Everybody good?
I'm good.
Yep.
Ms. Beamer.
Okay.
Fine, I'm good.
Felicia, okay, good. 6 o'clock, let's put it down. April 19th. Address.
And following that meeting, we should be able to present and have a better picture on when we'll be ready to present something in May and set a couple of meeting dates during that time frame. But we'll be looking to schedule meetings on Mondays.
Okay, what about the community?
So the community participation will happen through this committee meeting, through the council meetings. We would encourage you as committee members to be engaging individuals in your respective wards that you're representing or the broader community, taking their input, encouraging them to participate in this meeting, as well as the council meetings in which the budget will ultimately be adopted.
So you're recommending the community to be engaged in our meeting April 19th at 6 o'clock?
Yes.
Is that what
Yes,
I'm hearing?
and the council meeting on April 8th, both, the council workshop.
What time is the council workshop is during council meeting?
So that is a special,
On April 8th, or is that a special? That's
it's a special meeting that is scheduled to begin at 5:30 p.m.
How long do those usually last? Say that April 8th meeting.
It really depends on the level of discussion. Generally, the presentation would not last more than probably an hour and a half or so, but depending on public comment and discussion, it could be several hours
Oh, okay.
or longer.
I'll bring the vodka.
And now, and I just want to be able to go understand, Rebecca. So you're going to have the departments, the heads, be able to give what projects they have shovel ready, and all of that's going to be presented on April 8th.
Yes, that's correct.
shovel-ready projects?
Well, in some cases, they won't be shovel-ready projects. They'll be projects that we're going to authorize to move forward. So it will be a mix of projects that are recommended, again, based on, the needs throughout the city. We've got a number of assessments that will be based off of. So all of that information is going to be presented to the council, and you need to have full visibility, and the council needs to have full visibility of what we're projecting in terms of revenue, so that we can make some strong recommendations moving forward.
Okay. Okay. Commissioners, anything else you'd like to say regarding the dates or the workshops? Okay. So is that it with our was that the last thing was our workshop on our agenda, or? I know.
Yes, that's the last thing on your agenda before adjournment.
Okay. Okay, and then we had a new member in finances. Who was that again? Barbara, you said?
Barbara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I would like Barbara to introduce herself. Sorry, Barbara.
Oh, that's all right.
To do it at the beginning.
I'm Barbara Whitehorn. I'm the new finance director. I'm joining San Bernardino from Asheville, North Carolina. Before that, I was in Arlington, Texas, and another small city in Texas before that. So got about 15 years of government finance experience and then other finance experience before that. So lots of finance, really excited to be here. Still a bit at sea, but very happy to be working with Shelby and Sam and Rebecca and everybody, and just really happy to be here. So hopefully soon I will be actually able to answer questions rather than just sit here smiling while other people do.
Well, excellent. Welcome. We welcome you, and I would definitely let the commissioner say something to you, but definitely we look forward to the improvements of our city and through your help and your years of experience with finance. Anyone else would like to say anything to Ms. Barbara?
Just welcome aboard, Barbara. And I'm sure you'll be sharing with the council any priority investments that you might have in your department to move it to the next level.
No doubt. Thank you.
Welcome, Barbara. Best of luck in your new position.
Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome, Barbara, to the city of San Bernardino. I'm a retired city of San Bernardino employee.
Yes, code enforcement. Yes, excellent.
Thank you.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
No, we can do a motion to adjourn, or after that, that was the last thing on the agenda anyway. So if there is nothing else to be said, then we'll, if we need to get with you and contact with you, we'll definitely do that prior to. But thank you so very much for coming. And at this point, again, welcome all of our newcomers, and meeting adjourned.
Have a good night, everyone. We will see you on April 19th at 6 p.m.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.